Welcome, everyone. I'm Dick Deming. I'm Medical Director of Mercy One Cancer Center in Des Moines and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our weekly cancer education series. It's brought to you in part by a grant from the Iowa Oncology Society. And our guest tonight is Dr. Michael Henry. Welcome, Dr. Henry.
Thanks, Dick. Glad to be here. Yeah.
So, Michael is interim director of the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Iowa. And Dr. Henry is a PhD. And we're going to have a conversation tonight that's kind of all over the place, talking about what it means to be a cancer center director of an NCI comprehensive cancer center, what that means, and then a little bit about what's new and what's going on at the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center. But first, let's get to know you. So, Dr. Michael Henry, where did you grow up?
So I was born in a little town in northern Missouri that you probably haven't heard of. It's called Marceline. Its population is a little over 2,000. Its real claim to fame was not the place that I was born. Its claim to fame is that it was the boyhood home of Walt Disney.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, he grew up on a farm there, and apparently, got inspiration for some of his characters from that experience. So, as you might imagine, in a town that size, a lot of the streets are named after Disney characters, and it's a big production there. But it was a railroad town, and Marceline and Fort Madison, Iowa, were stops on the Santa Fe Railroad between Chicago and Kansas City. And in the past, crews lived there, and they changed crews there. That was really what gave life to the town. And then, I can't remember exactly when it occurred, but it was when I was a kid. They no longer stopped there anymore, and that really changed the fortunes of that town. So yeah.
And did you go to high school in Marceline?
No. I went to high school at a couple of different places in Missouri. Mostly, if you ask me where I grew up, I would say Jefferson City, Missouri, or Jeff City. As it's one of the more obscure state capitals, but that's where I grew up. It was actually a great place to grow up. I grew up outside of town and ran around in the woods. My curiosity about nature really kind of started from that direct experience. But I would go back up to northern Missouri and work on a farm in the summer. I had a farmer who put up with mistakes that I made driving vehicles earlier than I should have been driving them. And that was a great experience as well.
Did you ever take off like a big garage door with the mirrors on the truck?
I took a mirror off a truck.
Yeah, okay. I had a similar experience in a farm in South Dakota. So how big a high school? How many in your high school class?
Jeff City High School had it was the only public high school in town. There was a Catholic high school there. I think maybe we had 1,800 students, something like that, total. Jefferson City wasn't, it's a tiny town. It's a reasonable sized town.
Yeah,
obviously,
and state capital, obviously. So what was your claim to fame in high school?
Well, not much in traditional athletics. I broke my collarbone the first time I tried to wrestle. I broke my nose playing baseball. I dislocated my kneecap playing football. What I did end up doing during high school, though, was I really got into whitewater kayaking, and went with some friends, started with canoeing, and then got into kayaking. And as I got older in high school, we ended up going down to southeast Missouri on the St. Francis River, and I really got into that. So it's a little unusual. That was probably my claim to fame. It was not a lot of the more traditional things, I would say.
Yeah, cool. And then where'd you go to college?
Well, so I had the great fortune of moving during my senior year of high school to Marietta, Georgia. My dad was a pilot and was in the military for a long time, but then took a job with the Department of Interior in Atlanta. And that was my senior year of high school. And I went down there, and part of the reason I was willing to buy into this is what I just told you about. That was like moving to to a mecca for kayaking. You know, the Southeast, the mountains in Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee are a wonderful place to go paddling, and I just completely dove into it there. And really, it was really one of these things that changed my life. Going down there, the rest of my trajectory I trace from that. I ended up going to the University of Georgia and met my wife there. In fact, that was school was, you might find this surprising. I was not planning on going to college immediately after high school. I'd been working at a canoe and kayak shop, and then had a job lined up as a raft guide in North Carolina. So I was going to really pursue this like crazy. And then
Right.
I met my wife Sloan the night I graduated, and I think you've met Sloan before. She used to
I
work with the
did,
consortium
yes.
for a while. Met her the night I graduated from high school, and boy, the rest is history. I ended up going to college to stay closer to her, and then yeah,
What was your first major in college?
my first major, well, I was undeclared, and then I actually, they were fishing for, I was pretty much floating my own boat. My parents helped out as much as they could, but I was paying for a lot. And those were the days when, as a student at a public institution, you could reasonably expect to work and, in the summers and then during the year, and put yourself through college. And that was basically my experience. Um, my first major though was in agriculture. Actually, the College of Agriculture there was looking for people to, at least they were trying to give away scholarships, and I was very upfront. I said I'm not sure that I'm going to stick with agriculture long term, but I tried it, and I took a course or two and had a scholarship for a year. And to me, that made a lot of difference. And then eventually, I got more interested in doing science. I had another job where I had the breakfast shift at the cafeteria, and there's something about standing over a vat of scrambled eggs at 5:30 in the morning that focused the mind on what I wanted to do. And one of my kayaking buddies said it knew about a lab assistant job at the Institute of Ecology at the University of Georgia, and they're really well known in ecology there. And so I went and got a job. My first lab job was they were doing a study on Blackwater rivers in South Georgia, and my job was to measure total organic carbon in a river sediment sample. And the way we did that is you take the sample, you measure it very, very accurately to 3 or 4 decimal places, and then you put it in a hot oven overnight, and it burns all of the carbon away, and then you take it out the next day and measure it. And I loved this job compared to what I was doing. That I was all over this, and that gave me my first lab experience. And then I ended up getting a National Science Foundation scholarship there to pursue more of a research project, and ended up switching my major into genetics, and it was what I graduated with.
So graduated in genetics
Yeah,
at University of Georgia,
yeah, mm-hmm,
and
yeah.
then you went. Did you go into the marketplace, or did you continue on to get your master's and PhD right out
I
of?
went on to get my PhD. I went on to another football powerhouse school, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So that was really a great experience. MIT is like for
Wow.
graduate students is like this big sandbox that you can really try a lot of things. I ended up having a wonderful, wonderful mentor there named Frank Solomon, who that's really where I started doing cancer research for the first time. We worked on very basic cell biological things related to how the cytoskeleton in cells interacts with the plasma membrane. And that's important for how cells divide, how cells move around. And yeah, that's really kind of where I got into cancer research.
Well,
So,
tell us. I'm kind of interested in how you graduate with a bachelor's of science degree, and
mhm.
then you're in the process of applying for PhD programs, but you also have to sort of interview with senior scientists that might be taking you under their wing and deciding what branch of science you're actually going to work in as you're studying to get your PhD. For you, how did that work going
Yeah.
from your bachelor's degree to ending up at MIT in the particular field you ended up in?
Yeah. So one thing that helped, again, that goes back to my wife a little bit. She was a year behind me, and so I graduated from Georgia, and then was fortunate to spend another year in the lab of my mentor there, named Sidney Kushner, who also, I mean, he helped shepherd my path into science there, and so I stayed on for a year, and I ended up getting Sydney's and some other people's advice about where to apply. And this is one of the stories I often tell applicants to Iowa when I meet with them. I thought from the work that I had done as an undergraduate, which was really about understanding how, and I studied E. coli, the bacteria E. coli, as a model system, and the work I was doing there was a lab at the University of Wisconsin that was like doing what I saw as like the next step. I thought I was going to go, revolutionize the world by understanding messenger RNA stability in animal cells as compared to E. coli. And that's what I was thinking about doing. But Sydney and others said, "Oh, apply to other schools." I ended up applying to 4 schools. And, when I started the process, I was convinced I wanted to go to Wisconsin. But after I got to see some of these other places, it kind of opened up my mind. I was like, well, there's a lot else going on in the world of biology and biomedical science. Maybe I ought to, take a step back. And so I always tell undergraduates that, you don't really necessarily know exactly what it is you want to do. And your first year or so in graduate school really kind of opens up your mind to what else is out there, what else might you want to do. So that's a
Okay.
little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then tell us about your experience there at MIT and what you came out of MIT with a PhD, and what do you consider your area of expertise?
Yeah, so I really, did basic cell biology there, and when I finished, as a PhD, and you typically, and certainly back in my day, you typically went on to postdoctoral training, which is roughly analogous to residency in medicine. In other words, you've got a certain background skill set, and then as a postdoc you go and get more independent. You take on a new project, new mentor, and you're generally treated with a little bit more independence than you are as a graduate student. And when I was finishing up there, my mentors at MIT, including people on my thesis committee, they recommended that I go check out this lab at Iowa. They knew that I had been from the Midwest, and sometimes, people that are on the coasts are kind of afraid of what's going on in the
Yeah.
in the middle of the country, but I wasn't, because I was from here. Sloan and I had just had our first child, a son, Brooks, and we could have been on a moon of Jupiter, as for as much as it really mattered to us at that point. But they recommended a lab directed by Kevin Campbell at the University of Iowa. And Kevin is a Howard Hughes investigator, which is, one of the prestigious scientific organizations here in the United States. There's only a small number of Hughes investigators relative to the total number of scientists. And they said they thought really interesting things were going on in Kevin's lab, and I should check it out. And so I did, and I ended up joining Kevin's lab. Now, Kevin's lab is really most well known for his work on muscular dystrophy and how that happens. But what attracted me to Kevin's lab is that they were working on a protein that is known to be involved in muscular dystrophy. So when you get mutations that affect this protein in one way or another, you end up with various forms of muscular dystrophy. What Kevin's lab had found out when I was looking at joining his lab is they had knocked out this gene. They had eliminated this gene from a mouse, and that mouse didn't progress beyond about 5.5 days of embryonic development, which is earlier than there's any muscle at all in a mouse. And so it was clear that this particular gene was doing something that was more fundamental, or at least in addition to what it was doing in muscle. And that was an interesting puzzle. And so I went to Kevin's lab and was in Kevin's lab for about 4 years. And what we learned about this, the protein encoded by this gene, is that it helps cells organize something that's immediately outside of them, called the extracellular matrix. This is stuff that cells make that they stick to, and it helps to organize tissues, and it's related to cancer, because when a pathologist takes a slide of a biopsy and looks at it, one of the things that they look at it for is to tell what the relationship between the cancer cells and the extracellular matrix is. And this particular type of extracellular matrix is called the basement membrane. And so they often look to see whether cancer cells have broken through the basement membrane. That normally forms a boundary around glands and other structures and tissues that cancer cells overcome. And sure enough, we then looked at what was going on with this gene in cancer. We did it, first of all, in prostate and breast cancer. And our initial findings were that, this gene is abnormal in those types of cancers. And it's associated with this breakdown of the basement membrane. And then a number of other groups went on to substantiate that in a wide variety of tumors. So the work I did at Iowa as a postdoc ultimately connected me to cancer as well. So
in that particular gene, would it be fair to say that that's a gene mutation?
Yeah, what was interesting about it, Dick, is that the defect in cancer wasn't actually in that gene itself. What we found, and this was very much a collaborative effort with Kevin and others, what we found is that what was defective in cancer is not the gene itself, but genes that encode for proteins called glycosyl transferases. And they put sugar pieces of carbohydrates onto proteins. And those carbohydrate bits on this protein are what allow it to interact with the extracellular matrix. So what was defective in cancer was not dystroglycan itself, but these other genes that modify it so that it can do what it is supposed to do. So that's story. Yeah.
So if I send a patient of mine that's, under 50 has been diagnosed with cancer, and we do genetic counseling and genetic tests to see if the patient has any genetic mutations that may predispose them to getting cancer, does this gene that you worked on show up in that panel of genes?
It's a great question, and the answer so far is no. And people have looked. These alterations in these glycosyl transferases seem to be primarily present in somatic cells. So they don't happen in the germline. You can't test it and see it that it is related to familial inheritance patterns of cancer, but it happens in the cancer cells themselves. So those changes happen as cancer develops, and
Okay.
still don't totally know why that is. Actually, yeah.
So we're going to switch directions. So we learned that you were probably the first kayaker I ever knew in high school. I really want to pursue that line of questioning and know where else in the world did you go to South America? Did you go to the Himalayas? I want to know that, but we're not going to do that tonight.
Okay.
And then you became a real science geek, and for God's sakes, got a PhD at MIT, and then a postdoc at Iowa. Go
Yeah.
Hawkeyes!
Yeah.
And then at some point, relatively recently, I think within the last year, you became the interim executive director or interim director of the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center. So when you did that, did you give up being a scientist? And what are the commonalities and the major difference between being a scientist in the lab and being an administrator in an office trying to make 1,000 people happy?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you definitely know a lot about the latter. I know that is for sure. So no, the answer to you is no. I did not give up my lab, and in fact, that is something that I'm not ready to do anytime soon. One of the things in my little story that we skipped over is so when I finished my postdoc here, I actually went back to Boston and worked at a pharmaceutical company for 5 years before I came back to Iowa. And the reason that I came back to Iowa had a lot to do with the fact that at a company I was, getting involved in, talking to lawyers and business people a lot more than I was spending time in the lab, and I wasn't ready to give that up yet. And coming back to academia allowed me to pursue that. So it's really kind of the same thing now. I've got this big administrative hat to wear, and I should tell you that I worked in progressive administrative roles in the Cancer Center since 2009. I was a program leader, and then I became deputy director and worked with George Weiner through 3 competitive renewals of our NCI grant with George. And I hadn't actually really thought a lot about becoming a director until the last few years. Another mentor of mine asked me, who became a cancer center director and was retiring, asked me to come out and take a look at the job. Knew I had been deputy director for a number of years, and it was a person that I couldn't say no to, and I did it. But I when I went out there, I wasn't that interested, and then over the course of that visit and the subsequent recruitment effort, I got more interested in taking on that role and seeing what sort of impact I could have by really orchestrating and supporting the efforts of others. And at this point in my career, while I'm still my lab is relatively small, but still active. We're still funded. I continue to and keep it going because I don't think I can give that up. I'm very curious by nature, and it that's where I really exercise a lot of that curiosity. But I'm curious about this director role too. As a PhD, I didn't have medical training like you did, and a comprehensive cancer center is about really the whole mission of the cancer center, which is research, education, and clinical care. And although I'd been deputy director for those many years with George, I had really focused more on the research and education missions, not so much on clinical care. So part of this last year for me has been spending a lot of time with various folks involved in caring for our patients, everywhere from front desk staff to nurses to surgeons to medical oncologists to genetic counselors. I'm not even done yet, and I've probably spent 40, 50 hours with spending time just directly learning from people what their roles are, what their challenges, what their joys are, what this is all about to them. And that has been a very revealing and interesting. I mean, I'm finding it lots of questions, and maybe the fact that I'm not an MD frees me to ask all sorts of naive questions, because nobody expects me to know, what these things are. So I can just ask questions as they come, and that's been good. I have more of that to do, more to learn directly
And,
from the folks
and
doing it.
as you mentioned, I mean, a university cancer center encompasses, as you already said, research with
Mhm,
lots of other PhDs and other scientists, as well as education, because you're
mhm.
part of a university that's educating undergrads and MDs and PhDs. And it's also, though, clinical care. What do you
Mhm.
think are the advantages, and you've already outlined some of them, of being a PhD in this position, and what are some of the disadvantages of being a PhD in this position as opposed to an MD?
Yeah. So on the research front, I'm pretty comfortable, and that includes clinical research, clinical trials. That even started back when I worked for that company. My team at Millennium ended up putting a new drug into the clinic, and I got a sense of a massive team effort that's required to do something like that. I'm familiar with the clinical trials process. So that part of it I felt really comfortable with, but it really was this clinical care piece that I only knew very indirectly. And I have family members who have cancer. I've seen it through their eyes, but I had never kind of gotten that behind the scenes look. So what I know is that there's a lot that I still don't know. But what I also know is that as a PhD, so there are roughly 56, I think, uh, NCI designated comprehensive cancer centers in the country. There are 8 or so PhD directors of cancer centers. So I knew getting into this that it was possible. There were some people that were PhDs that were very successful. I know that I don't have to render medical opinion, and this was made very apparent on like the second day I was interim director, because I got an email, Dr. Henry, we're running out of cisplatin. What do we do? I'm like, wow, I am spectacularly unqualified to answer this question for you. But what I did know is who I needed to get in the room to really answer that question, and that has come up a number of times since then. Just making sure that I know who is a part of our team. I know who can really make decisions. And I'm interim director now. We're going through a process of interviewing. In fact, I interviewed this week for the actual position. There's going to be a number of other people that come through to interview for the job. And I mean, if I think what I would do, what a number of other PhD directors would do, in fact, many MD directors as well, appoint someone, a deputy director, to focus on clinical affairs, or a physician in chief. And that would be the direction that I would be headed as well, because it is important to have someone that does have that more in-depth knowledge to sort of be the point person. But as interim, I've been able to make sure we get the right people in the room to make decisions.
So how much of your job is trying to secure funding, whether it's protecting or enhancing your budget in the university system, in the state system, helping get grants from national organizations? How much of it is this financial, and then trying to as the director, make sure everyone is treated equally, and some people are going to feel like their budget isn't big enough? How much is it that financial acquiring and distributing of funds throughout the cancer center? How much of it is recruiting of personnel, and how much of it is just putting out fires?
You've kind of outlined the job. You should come and interview, Dick. So
No, thank you.
So in terms of funding, so there's a primary important responsibility in making sure that we're performing on the NCI Cancer Center Support Grant. So even when we're not doing a competitive renewal annually, we have to file progress reports and keep up with that. The director, I get involved in mentoring some individual scientists and clinicians on their applications, particularly junior people. One of the things I get involved in a little bit more on the grant side too is trying to help orchestrate some larger multi-project grant that involves project grants that have multiple investigators. There are several different flavors of these. One is called a SPORE, which is an acronym for Specific Program of Research Excellence, and they often follow particular types of cancer. So I get involved in that. Of course, and I know this will resonate with you, I actively meet with donors. Philanthropy is a big part of the job. We really are really only our mission is critically dependent on philanthropy, and so I met with a donor today, and it's something that I do on a regular basis. It's really important. We couldn't do it without donors, and it's not just about getting the initial donation. It's about letting them know about the impact that their gift has made, and how we're using it. So that's an ongoing activity. Recruiting, that is a huge part of the job too, and that's something I'm really active in. So we have a matrix, what's called a matrix cancer center, which means that the director of our cancer center doesn't have the ability to make faculty appointments. So you have to work with department chairs all over. I mean, the great thing about the cancer center is it's not just the College of Medicine. We have faculty in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, College of Engineering, College of Pharmacy, College of Public Health is one of the largest colleges that we interact with. And so as a cancer center director, you can work across all of those parts of the university to bring in faculty that represent a whole variety of diverse interests, and really try to get them working together. That's a big part of it. And of course, there are always fires, and that goes with the territory. So you pretty much covered a day in the life with that description. Yeah.
And you'll be happy to know that your philanthropy team actually reached out to me today. I got a text to contribute to the University of Iowa. What's it called? One Iowa. One Iowa. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
they do a campaign. Yeah.
I think it came from your cell phone, in fact. So,
Oh my gosh! Oh wow! Maybe
um,
I better check on that.
no, I'm just kidding. So tell us a bit more. So the University of Iowa is the only cancer center, Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center, only cancer center in Iowa to have the NCI designation as a NCI a designated comprehensive cancer center. Tell us a bit what that means, and then I want to get into what distinguishes the University of Iowa Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center. But first, maybe for those who might not know this terminology of NCI designated comprehensive cancer center, what does that mean? How long have you had the designation?
Yeah.
And you already alluded to a bit some of the hoops you have to jump through periodically to demonstrate that you're deserving not only of that designation but the funding that comes with it.
Yeah. So, this program, the Cancer Centers program got going in the 70s. I believe it was, after the Nixon administration declared the war on cancer. The Cancer Center programs got going. At Iowa, George Weiner was the founding director of the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center, which was designated in 2000, the year 2000, and really still kind of has a notable accomplishment of being, initially designated as a comprehensive cancer center, whereas many other cancer centers start their life as a clinical cancer center. Comprehensive speaks to the breadth and depth of the research. So we have to cover the entire continuum of research from basic, translational, clinical, population science, as well as the spectrum of work from prevention, screening, basic biology, therapy, and survivorship, and really public health issues. So comprehensive means that you have folks represented across the center that are involved in all of those various things. And then what the center is really about is trying to orchestrate and make the whole greater than the parts by promoting transdisciplinary collaboration across those areas. So the NCI really focuses on our research and education, as well as these days, there are a couple of additional components that they look at us. We have now been for about the last 10 years have been tasked to do more in the area of community outreach and engagement. And I think this is a really important evolution of cancer centers. The latest research, is only as good as it reaches people that need it. And community outreach and engagement is about getting out in the community, letting them know what's going on, collaborating with others to have the impact of the research done in the cancer center and more broadly in the whole of the cancer centers
Right.
program.
Right. And just to remind folks who may not know that, so only about 15% of cancer patients in the United States are treated at comprehensive cancer centers. 85% of cancer patients are treated at community cancer centers. So just in comparison, the University of Iowa Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center, NCI designated comprehensive cancer center with research as an essential component. Mercy Cancer Center, where I'm at, is a comprehensive community cancer center. So certainly nowhere near the amount of research. We do participate in clinical trials, but when you look at all the community cancer centers around the country, actually 85% of patients are treated there. So it just speaks to the importance of those university comprehensive centers having relationships with community centers to make sure that all of the research you're doing gets put into practice sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah. Honestly, Dick, that's how we're going to have a bigger impact in a shorter period of time. If we can implement things that we already know how to do better, that is going to have a huge impact. Yes, there are still a number of areas that require research, that require more innovation. That I think will be with us for a while, but getting better at just making sure everyone can benefit from the latest advances is a really important part of our mission. And so they've recognized that, and are now there's also an additional component called the Plan to Enhance Diversity. Of course, I think a culture of inclusive excellence makes us better, makes us smarter, makes us more creative. And, the NCI has asked us to look at what's going on. And of course, part of that in a state like ours is making sure that we're bringing trainees in that have rural backgrounds, that they're a part of our leadership, and that we're addressing patients' needs appropriately in rural areas as well. So, that's the latest piece in the Comprehensive Cancer Center puzzle. So, yeah.
So tell us, what are some of the achievements and the areas, and I know there are many, many areas of excellence, and I do want to leave some room for questions, because we have a live studio audience and we also have live streaming. But what are some of the maybe more novel programs that you would like to call out that are going on right now at the University of Iowa that distinguishes you, not only in the state but in the country?
Yeah. So, I could go on about a variety of things, and maybe I'll just touch on a few. Our population scientists are really, really key to our effort, and they have been involved in a number of research efforts over the years. They were really instrumental in shining a light on radon, and the danger that is to Iowa because of the geologic cards that we've drawn here. They were key in doing some of the research that established this, and then getting involved in policy actions that brought this to light, that are still moving forward today, as well. If I look at some of the other areas of research that I think we've made progress in, we have a unique research program here called the Free Radical Metabolism and Imaging Program. It is very much tied into a particular understanding of cancer that is based on metabolic features of cancer cells, particularly how they manage to do redox biology. And this team has translated various ideas into the clinic, into clinical trials. One of them are the high dose ascorbate trials that Iowa is certainly has done more of than other places in the country, but other places in the country are interested in. There are ongoing findings being published in this area. I would say that's another area of excellence, and we're building excellence in theranostics, doing research to theranostics is an area where you combine the ability to image cancer with the ability to treat cancer. And so the first products in the theranostics space have come onto the market, but I think there's going to be a growing number of these in the future. We have a really good basic science exploring the nature of drug resistance. If we could make cancer cells respond better to the drugs that we have, that would be a significant advance. Even in my own neck of the woods, the work that various labs do in the area of metastasis, or how cancer spreads from one site to another. I could really go on about a lot of different individual stories that we have. In cancer immunology, there have been important advances in that space as well at Iowa. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And we'll give you an opportunity to elaborate when we get into the questions. Maybe my last question before we open it up is, what keeps you awake at night? What do you worry about?
Yeah, clinic. So, I suspect some of it is things that you might worry about. We have gone through and are still going through some real challenges with staffing in nursing and in certain provider areas, medical oncologists. I think this shortage of medical oncologists has been foretold for some time, because of just trends that have been going on. And we still have to bring people in, make it attractive to have an academic career at Iowa. So there are always those challenges have, I'd say, emerged in the sort of post-COVID era. So that's always on my mind. I mean, we're only as good as the people that are working with us, and so that's a challenge. Always you have to make sure that you have funding levels that are consistent with what's expected of a cancer center, and funding is always challenging. And this year's budget process has been very chaotic, to say the least, to see what's happening with that. And so, those are a couple of the broad things that I think anyone who's a cancer center director would look at. And I think some of that overlaps obviously with concerns that you would have as well in your role. So yeah.
Right. Great. We're going to open up to questions. So we've got a large studio audience here that's live, and we also have folks that are watching us live stream. If you're watching us live stream, just put your question in the comments section, but we'll start with our live studio audience here for questions. So we got George first.
Are there any particular types of cancer that patients are best suited going to a facility like yours, where a lot of research has been done on that cancer? Do they connect that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, one thing that I would say is, the rarer the cancer, the often the more expertise that you'll find in centers like ours, because they attract patients, and then they have multidisciplinary teams that can see those sorts of cancers. So examples along those lines are like neuroendocrine cancers. We have we bring in patients from all over the country for neuroendocrine cancers. Sarcoma and melanoma, because of our team. Our teams here are extremely well known in those areas. There are cancer, there's a big spectrum, and patients don't want to travel any farther than they need to get the best care that they can. And the truth is, with a lot of more common types of cancer in their early stages, like breast cancer, for instance, if you have ER/PR positive, HER2 negative breast cancer, you can get good treatment really closer to home. There's no reason to come to Iowa for very basic things, if it's out of your way. As cancer gets more progresses, and then if you need to look at clinical trials, we offer a wider range of clinical trials in certain areas. We also offer a particular type of therapy called cellular therapy, CAR T therapy, that I think we might be the only place in the state that offers that kind of kind of therapy. And if your particular cancer, a lot of these are blood cancers, but it's begun to be common or become more common in certain solid tumors like melanoma. It might be the only place in Iowa that you could get that care. And those are the cases where you would really need to come and see us. But we don't think that we need to see every single, cancer case. And we'd like to collaborate and partner with others to share whatever expertise that we might have, because no one wants to drive many hours for a treatment unless there's absolutely no other option for them. So yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Next question. Yes, Judy.
With all the research being done at universities and pharma, and even individuals like Musk, do you think that cancer will be basically eradicated in the next 5-10 years, much like polio was back in the day?
Yeah, it's a great question. Eradicated in the next 5 or 10 years, I would say that I don't see eradicated as meaning there's no more cancer. I don't think that we'll be there in 5 to 10 years. Where we will be in 5 to 10 years is to have cancer be more of a controllable chronic disease for more and more people. And in fact, that goes back to what Dick and I were talking about. Even if we could just do a better job of, getting some of what we already know how to do out there available to more patients, then, we could make big inroads. This latest moonshot is to reduce cancer by a half or 50% in, I don't know, 15, 20 years. I can't remember the specifications that were put on it by the White House. Making a big reduction like that in that sort of time frame, I think, is potentially achievable. And a lot of that will be done just like what I just said, like making what we already know how to do more accessible, improving prevention and screening. These are ways that we can really, the best cancer is the cancer you don't get. And, being more proactive in screening and finding it early where cures are more possible. We're going to keep headed in that direction. But eradicated in 5 to 10 years, I don't think we will get quite there, but we're going to continue to make progress. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. I think we have a question from one of our live streamers.
Well, this question has to do with the moonshot that you mentioned. Public financing has got to be a big part of that. Are facilities like yours starting to see some of that money? Is it coming through? Are you benefiting from that yet, or is that something yet to come?
Yeah, well, our main public funder is the NIH, and most of that is through the NCI. I think that there is a somebody at Iowa has a project that is partially funded by the moonshot effort, and the moonshot is really about doing a lot of that they have a lot of focus on really big projects and data sharing, and we certainly benefit from that at the University of Iowa. So it's not like I don't know the dollar figure that is funding work at Iowa from the moonshot, but I think we're better because they take on some challenges about how we work together and how we share data across the entire cancer ecosystem that are really important. I think the NIH will still be the main funder of focused projects on biology, therapy, prevention, screening, public health. That's going to still be the main source of government funding. Yeah.
Mike, just out of curiosity, and this is just I won't hold you to this, but just in broad buckets of money. So if you look at the Holden Cancer Center, or maybe you want to talk about just the University of Iowa, UIHC, University of Iowa Health Centers, what percentage of the money comes from the federal government via NIH or NCI versus the state of Iowa? Do
Yeah.
you have a sense for how much is federally funded versus how much is funded by the state?
Yeah, I do. For the cancer center itself, only a tiny fraction of funds come from the state. We get about $150,000 a year to fund some melanoma related research. Now, the state does fund other entities that we work with, like the Iowa Cancer Consortium that you're familiar with, but direct research funding from the state is very small compared to other centers in other sort of similar states. We get a very small percentage, and that is compared to about $25 million of peer-reviewed funding, with 11 up to almost $12 million of that coming from the NCI. So you can see that it's a really small fraction
Right.
of
And
our
that would be research, but
research.
but
Yeah.
obviously, and I don't know that it really matters or what I'm trying to get at, but obviously the state of Iowa, the people who work at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics are state employees.
Yeah, although they're state employees, but the state isn't funding their salaries. It used to be,
Oh, I see. So you
yeah.
have to fund that through your
Oh,
revenue.
yeah. So the University of Iowa, this was actually even before, I think this had transitioned before I came here. The University of Iowa used to have faculty salaries, used to be budget line items, and it has not been that way for a long time. So, we really fund our efforts through getting grants, through clinical revenues, through things like this. We're not, getting, sort of line item funding for faculty salaries.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you're paying for all of that as revenue from the revenue that you
Mhm.
generate in the operations, along with philanthropy and
Yeah.
grants.
Now the university does get some. The university does get some support for the educational mission, and I'm sure that filters into cancer through some training efforts and things like this. But faculty and staff salary is not a main component of that.
Gotcha. We have time for one more question. Here we go, Gary.
Equation. Do you get grants from pharma companies, or do you also contribute to them in any other way?
Yeah, so that is particularly for clinical trials. Pharma, a number of the trials that we conduct here are supported by pharma, and that is contract research. So they pay for the trial to be conducted. There's a smaller number of folks that may get some direct research support from pharmaceutical companies, and then there are some folks that have started companies. I actually started a company a while back, and they get they're either in startup phase. Our company started with SBIR, STTR grants. It's a type of grant that you can apply to from the federal government focused on companies. So they interact and contribute in a variety of ways, and so that is an important part of what we do as well.
Great. Well, our guest tonight has been Dr. Michael Henry, the interim director of the Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Iowa. Thank you, Dr. Henry, for being our guest. This has been great, and we'll have you back again. If you know someone that would benefit by watching this program, it will be available on demand beginning tomorrow at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel and also the Mercy One Cancer Center website. I hope you'll join us again next week at our weekly cancer education series. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dick. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Really